Perfect. Technology is working. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and it's really great to also follow Fanman, who's been a great colleague in this community engagement space in humanitarian responses. And I'm actually going to build on what he was saying, even though that was probably not intentional, and talk a little bit about how people on the receiving end of this assistance perceive tech and innovation in humanitarian responses. So I thought I would talk a little bit about some of the tech traps, which are going to sound a bit familiar, but again, coming from the perspective of people who receive assistance and engage with humanitarian actors. There are obviously a lot of great solutions as well. Most of the examples will come from economic recovery and cash programming, because that's my background. But I'll mention a bit about what people care about in humanitarian responses, what they've been telling us, and that what should be the compass, as Fanman was saying, in future responses.
Sorry, Luisa. Yes, the internal team is asking if it is possible to put your screen as a full screen.
Yes. Is this better?
Yes, better. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. I'll then go on to the kind of 4 major don'ts that communities are raising when aid providers use tech and innovation to engage with them. What has worked in different crisis contexts around the world, and then kind of what to think about going forward. So what do people care about? This is kind of a boiled down synthesis of what we've been hearing for the past 15 years across crises like Yemen, Somalia, Nigeria, Myanmar, etc. And I'll give you more practical examples there. And you'll see that it kind of then defines what community empowerment and engagement is. So they want to set those program priorities together, being involved from the beginning. Then defining those implementation and feedback processes where we see a lot of the tech being applied, and being able to provide real-time feedback to fix how that's working. And then finally reflecting on what worked and what didn't, but only once they kind of know those providers, once they know you. That idea of relationship building and trust that Fanman was talking about and that others have mentioned is really inherent to community engagement. And when leveraging that tech, the issues that come up time and again are around that trust. So the information sources and who's providing what, the power dynamics, and the fact that if you're providing assistance or even mobilizing communities to receive information, you have something that people need, and they may feel reluctant to share those views in the ways that work for you, whether it's through WhatsApp or face-to-face. And then this idea of joint decision-making being at the heart of community empowerment and inclusion. What does that have to do with tech? Well, I like to think about it in terms of our own lives, because we do a lot of othering in this space where we talk about migrants and refugees. They are people just like us, and some of us are migrants and refugees. We make decisions on how to engage in tech based on people that we trust and experiences that we can count on. So with that in mind, I'll move to the first kind of tech trap, which is that tech doesn't improve access to information or to humanitarian assistance in itself. This picture is from Kirundo in northern Burundi, and communities affected by drought and subsequent malnutrition there, they received cash via SIM cards to meet their basic needs. And this program wanted to support vulnerable mothers to gain access to mobile money and get some financial independence. But many of them had limited literacy and they didn't own phones. So they would take a SIM card to a distribution point. A man, like in this photo, would take a basic phone, put the SIM card in, and give them the cash. So in the end, the use of this tech didn't actually improve their access to financial services because of the limitations that they faced. And so if we kind of unpack a bit this idea that it doesn't enable access in and of itself tech, the program design can unintentionally exclude certain people or groups if it goes digital without the accompaniment, which I'll get to in a second, and it can amplify that exclusion. So there's a quote here, and the translation is a little bit clunky, but it's from a Facebook comment, as Fanman was saying. People, a lot of aid providers may overlook the comments, but that's where the real information is coming from in a lot of these cases. And this Ukrainian man was saying, I left my data everywhere. I registered everywhere I could, but I don't hope anymore. Everyone promises, and you can only rely on your hands and feet and God. And so this kind of illustrates how people can feel frustrated if they don't have the support they need to access this type of tech. And I just wanted to underline that analog solutions can be innovative. So without denying the fact that tech can make community engagement happen at scale and quickly, there are some people that might be left behind, and it's okay if tech doesn't reach everyone. So then getting to the kind of second tech trap, which is making tech work for people in need and not making tech for people. And I hope that translation works in Spanish as well. But this is a picture from a Burundian refugee camp in Congo, where special mobile voucher programs were set up to provide refugees with food assistance and shelter support. But because they were dedicated humanitarian programs, people were not able to access the full range of financial products and services offered to most mobile money customers. And the mobile network operators, they couldn't interact with them as they would with usual customers. And they relied on aid agencies to help them navigate that system, or came up with their own solutions, which is this very, very intricate paper solution. So when we think about this tech trap, what does it mean to be an empowered community? Sometimes that might mean hearing that the tech or the solutions that we thought were so great may not be what people see that as the same thing. This very powerful quote came from a Rohingya person in Bangladesh about the use of biometrics for digital ID. And he said, stop testing your systems on us. This idea that, there's a difference between tailoring tech for affected people and creating parallel systems where those aid agencies need to be the gatekeepers. That may be a last resort, but we have some really great examples, for example, in the Americas on the migration. How do you make WhatsApp work for people on the move? Is there a way to remove these kind of national barriers of roaming or accepting mobile money across borders? There's a way to take those systems and, as Stefan was saying, meet people where they are. So it's just kind of a reality check of who this innovation is for. Is it for your programs to collect amazing analytical data? So having a WhatsApp registration that has 74 questions, or is it for really community empowerment? And can we find solutions for both? The third tech trap is around new tech and innovation needs accompaniment. So Fanman was talking a lot about making sure that we meet people where they are. Sometimes you do need to introduce new technological solutions, but then those need to be accompanied. So this is a picture from the refugee, migrant, and asylum seeker programs in Serbia about 5 years ago. And so for people on the move, arriving to a different country and trying to understand how to navigate that system can be chaotic. And in Serbia, for legal reasons, it was impossible to provide direct cash assistance. So many aid organizations turned to innovative solutions like these electronic gift cards, which are unique to Serbia. I had never heard of them. People give them to each other. They have a credit on them, and they can be used anywhere, on a bus, to buy clothes, to buy food. But they were unfamiliar to the wide range of nationalities passing through the country. And so in this example, the Catholic Relief Services partnered with the Serbian authorities to accompany and support people in navigating their entitlements of assistance and using this new digital system, and then using their feedback to adapt it. So this new tech idea means thinking 5 steps ahead, and connecting communities might need that built-in support to familiarize people and accompany them on that journey. And that needs to be budgeted. Now, suggesting these innovations or new tech that no one's thought of can be a really powerful way to solve age-old solutions like this Serbia example. But people need to be able to navigate that system, and vulnerable parts of the community may need accompaniment. It doesn't need to be an expensive solution. So for example, just providing phone credit to community mobilizers or representatives to be able to link people to the network operating the aid agency can happen. But often humanitarian responses are not designed to go beyond that immediate delivery, the sector or the project blinders, as we call them. And so when we see organizations acting as a bridge between community priorities, the tech providers, and the aid system, that's where it really works. And so in that Burundian refugee camp that I showed earlier, they actually put together a separate program for youth to be able to support people in using mobile technology. Now, the youth were not considered the most vulnerable. They were not prioritized for the cash and shelter assistance, but they actually then found a newfound purpose to accompany particularly elderly people who had limited literacy and had not used mobile phones before to be able to do that. And the final tech trap is going to be a very obvious one, is that innovation alone cannot overcome barriers. This is Taichung Market in Rakhine State in Myanmar. And back in 2015, many Rohingya were still living in Myanmar, and they were living in camps concentrated in and outside of Rakhine with limited freedom of movement, and in fact, very restricted rights. And so aid agencies wanted to shift to either cash or vouchers, because a lot of the aid was being resold. And actually in this picture, you can see some of the in-kind assistance being resold. But they started to look into digital solutions, And they would have to be introduced into this previously disconnected part of the country. And so the issue remained, how would people travel to markets like this one and be able to buy goods and meet their needs? And so by saying tech alone cannot solve anything, we know this, but because tech promises community engagement at scale, we see this rapid deployment of tech. Chris was talking about the WhatsApp example in Ukraine. If it's a tech first or a tech only solution, it's going to run into problems when that two-way communication needs to be there, when that messaging and the reactivity and the adaptation, it can't all be done by algorithms. And why is it important to state the obvious? Well, if it doesn't work, then aid providers and especially donors can become risk averse to innovation. And that's when we see this endless cycle of pilot projects to see what works and all of this. And so we need to be very clear that tech needs that accompaniment and that it won't solve all the issues. And so using it as a tool to enable people to reach their goals means that, one, we have to understand what those goals are, but then two, we need to think about what that tech enables us to do and be able to monitor and to check if it's not able to reach that goal. Now, what works, in my experience, in many, many years, in many contexts, we don't know. And I love that example from Juan, where he said, we thought this one thing would work, but actually it was the group chats. And so trying as many options as possible if feasible, while still consolidating the information, is a really powerful way to be able to leverage tech to answer those problems. So to kind of sum up here, kind of what can you do about it? These are points that actually were mentioned by many of the presentations today. 3 factors that I've seen really make a difference, that if those are in solid foundation, the tech can then flourish and be a tool to amplify community engagement and empowerment. One is the cultures of participation. So it was talked a lot about in CDAC's presentation about how do people engage? What were they doing before the crisis? But it's also understanding that there needs to be plenty of perspectives. Humanitarians love acronyms. So there's 2 on this slide. One is POP, plenty of perspectives. So when we talk about how people prefer to engage, it doesn't need to be a deep anthropological study. It just needs to be, do we know how they prefer to communicate? And if we're talking about shifting to a new way of doing things for maybe operational reasons, are we accompanying them to do that? And within these plenty of perspectives, we need to recognize that communities are not homogenous. We use community as a shorthand, but it's important to think about the different groups within that community and how they interact. So a program that targets vulnerable women, like in Burundi, needs to think about how they interact with others, who they trust, who they support, who they rely on, and who may be a threat. And then finally, one tool that has been really useful is this idea of spending a day in the life of the person or the community that you're working with. So trying the tech yourself. I have a very embarrassing story about 10 years ago where we started using tablets to do real-time information collection and feedback collection during the Syria response in Lebanon, where we were asking these very young and motivated frontline workers to do, ask all these questions. And then I tried it myself with the tablet. It was impossible to have a real conversation. And the Syrian refugees who were in front of me, they were very amused and they were very patient. But we found that we really needed to test that tech. And so I would just say that user testing is an underrated tool in humanitarian responses. Do it yourself, but also do it with people and see how it goes. So I've put up something here that I'm calling the facilitator's role. It's the glow, and it's about thinking about, okay, all these issues that CDAC, Fanman, Juan, and others have been mentioning. There are different factors that you as an aid provider, as the champion of tech, can think about. So first and foremost is gender. How are you presenting, and how will that influence how people want to interact with you, and then the systems that you represent? What language are you speaking? Fanman spoke to that at length. But then also origin. Where are you from? In some parts in the world, for example, I spent a year in Bogota. I lived in Bogota. It's a very open and welcoming place. And in Latin America, people can tell almost immediately from your accent where you're from. Now, in other parts of the world, that origin may cause tension. Is it going to be a problem to be a Syrian refugee in Turkey, for example? And then finally, where do you work? So who do you represent when you come there? That's where that trust and the power dynamics come into play. It's the organization, it's the sector or program that can really influence how people engage. So I'm just going to leave you with this last slide, which is about changing the perspective. And this is also, again, from the Burundi program, which was done with GSMA, which is the global mobile network kind of collective, and they do a lot on mobile penetration. We did user journeys. So we changed the perspective and looked at that program from the perspective of people receiving the cash and how they were able to use that tech. And by mapping out the touch points, so when they connect with the program and the pain points where the barriers are, we were able to kind of think about it in a different way so that technology and the innovation in the delivery of aid and community engagement enables these positive changes in people's lives, but on their terms. So I'll stop there. And I want to stop sharing my screen so I can also see if there's any other chats. Thank you so much.